I'm feeling very, very insecure. I have absolutely no color in my slides, no fire, and I'm not funny. So I'm going to do my best. Let's see. Okay. So it was mentioned that I did my talk in February of 2011. It was actually, just because I'm a stickler for accuracy, February 25th, 2011. And I made a presentation about the things that I wished that I'd known about when I graduated college, which was actually quite a long time ago. And I outlined 10 things, the top 10 things I wish I knew when I graduated college. And this was the list that I presented. And I talked about how design talent is now equivalent to operational excellence. It's something that's just table stakes. If you are a designer, that's obviously what you're bringing to any situation that you're in. Money is rarely about money. Interesting about that particular comment, or that particular tenant, I've gotten more comments about that, mostly because in my explanation of why money is rarely about money, I use the example, the analog of sex is rarely about sex. And I've gotten a lot of comments about, well, why is sex rarely about sex? And I talk about how it's used as a way to sort of make intimacy happen, to get closer, and so on and so forth. In any case, here I am today, October 2nd, 2014. There are a lot of things that I realized after making that talk that I left out, like a lot of things. So I'm bringing you today my sequel. This is a sequel. I don't know if you have a Creative Mornings 2. This is a sequel to my 10 things that I wish I knew when I graduated college. So I'm calling this the 10 more things I wish I knew after I graduated college and before I gave my first Creative Mornings talk. Okay? Yeah. This is now going to be a really thorough list because 10 and 10 is 20. 20 things I wish I knew. Number 1. If you aren't making mistakes, you aren't taking enough risks. I think that we are living in a day and age that really, despite all the talk about failure and leaning in and failing fast and all of those other things, there's still a real shame about actually failing. People talk about failing, but the idea of failing still really has quite a lot of shame associated with it, in that you're not good enough at something, you haven't been able to achieve something that you wanted. And so I thought that this was a really wonderful quote by the tech entrepreneur Chris Dixon. If you aren't getting rejected on a daily basis, then your goals aren't ambitious enough. That's number 1. Number 2, expect anything to take a long time. We're living in what I am now calling a 140 character culture. We expect, because we can have global conversations instantly or hear about what's happening with ISIS instantly, that we put that same pressure on ourselves to be able to achieve instantly. And I think that what we need to be able to understand is that anything worthwhile, whether it be a relationship, whether it be a good meal, whether it be a big tree, all of these things take a really long time to develop and to perfect. And if you want to be great at anything, you have to think about it almost like an athlete. You wouldn't expect to go to the Olympics after deciding, hey, I want to be able to run a mile, and I'm going to go to the Olympics. In order to be able to achieve that, you'd actually have to train really, really hard for a really, really long time. So I think there's a real disconnect between wanting something really badly and exceeding at it immediately. I was talking about this concept in a talk recently, and a young person raised their hands and wanted some advice on how to make her blog more popular. She said that it really hadn't taken off at all. She didn't know what she could possibly do to make it more interesting, more engaging. And I said, well, how long are you doing it? And she looked at me really sincerely, dead straight in the eye, and said, 6 weeks. I was like, let's talk after the talk. Number 3, work very, very hard. People talk about a work-life balance, and I think it's a fallacy. I think that if you're looking for a work-life balance, chances are you don't really like what you're working at very much. And if you have to figure out a way to create a line in the sand between what you do for a living and what you do when you're not doing the thing that you're doing for a living, chances are you're really not feeling fulfilled by what it is that you're doing. I think the best case scenario that we could achieve as a species is to do the things that we love so they don't actually feel like we're working at all. Number 4, this is sort of related to number 3. You will work as hard at something that you hate as you will at something that you love. And I learned this the hard way. I think that we are living in a day and age, again, as I mentioned with tenant number 1, where it's almost shameful to fail. And there's a real sort of psychological, scientific reason for that. We don't like to fail as a species. I did a little poll with all of my students that I've taught over the years. What is it that keeps you from going after what you really, really want? What you have in your heart as your deepest desires. And this was the best answer that I got back. We think that if we fail, we won't recover from the disappointment and then we'll die of a broken heart. And I think that that's absolutely true. That's what keeps us from trying to do the things that we really, really want to do, because somehow we feel that if we don't succeed at doing those very things, that it will destroy us and we'll never recover. But that's not going to happen. I'm going to give you the best possible example. Does anybody know of a guy named Pete Best? Pete Best was the guy that was affectionately titled the 5th Beatle. Pete Best left the Beatles right before they made it in the big time, like the big, big, big time. He was so distraught after he left the Beatles and wasn't allowed to come back that he actually attempted suicide after the Beatles made it big. And in many respects, how do you ever recover from that? Like, you could have been in the greatest band that has ever been created of all time. Well, there was an article that came out a couple of years ago, and it talked about Pete Best. And this is the headline: Pete Best, the happiest Beatle of all. So what happens in our brains, in our psyche, is we have what scientists call a happiness set point. And if we do or don't get something that we want, we might feel it for a bit of time, but eventually we will go back to the feeling that we had before we had any of those things. It's a scientific phenomena called hedonic adaptation, or what some people call the hedonic treadmill. So no matter what it is that we aspire to, if we get it, if we don't get it, whatever happiness we get, whatever unhappiness we get, we ultimately come back to that set point. So Pete Best has somehow rationalized it or figured out that despite not being in the most popular band of all time, he was actually happier being a civil servant. And I think that if anybody could recover from that, the idea of not being able to get whatever dream you have tomorrow, chances are you will have more dreams the next day that you can aspire to achieve. Number 5. Ask for opportunities. I know a lot of people that want a lot of things, and somehow I think they're waiting to be discovered. They're waiting for somebody to find out how amazing they are. They're waiting for somebody to tap them on the shoulder and say, I know you're really good at that. Will you come do it for me? And I think that rarely, if ever, happens, unless you're really, really good friends with Steve Heller. He tends to just offer things to people. Most of the time, you have to ask for opportunities. You have to put yourself out there and actually ask for the things that you want. And I think that the two lovely, funny, color-coordinated people that were here before me were talking about how you have to publicly ask. I don't know that you necessarily have to publicly ask for opportunities, but you definitely have to personally ask for something that you maybe want that somebody else can help you with, especially if it has something to do with your career. Don't wait for things to happen to you. Don't wait for good luck. Ask yourself, what are you actually waiting for? If you want to do something that you're not doing right now, what are you waiting for? Number 6, finish what you start. The first 12 years of my career were experiments in what I call failure and rejection. And I realize now, only looking back on it now, that those experiments in failure and rejection were really, really, really valuable to me. And I think that you learn things about who you are when you're actually finished with something. We live in a day and age now where we start something, it doesn't quite work the way we want it to work, we discard it and we start again. And then we do that over and over and over again. Every obstacle that we find in front of us, rather than go over the obstacle, we sort of sideswipe the obstacle and then start something new. I suggest we go over the obstacles. Even if we fall over the obstacle, at least we've gotten through the obstacle. I think you learn so much in that moment, even when you're falling, about what it feels like to actually finish something and understand what it means when it's finished before you start yet another thing. Number 7. This is probably my most favorite thing I've ever said. So I'm going to say it again. Busy is a decision. This is something that I crafted upon hearing for the umpteenth time from any number of my students why they actually didn't do an assignment. They say, I was busy. And somehow that seems like an excuse. Why can't we do something tomorrow night? I'm busy. Why can't we do it next week? I'm busy. We use busy as an excuse. We use busy as a stand-in for all the real reasons that we don't do something. And I contend that if you use busy as a reason not to do something, it's really because you don't want to do it. And if you think about why you're saying you're busy, you might actually come up with the reason why you're procrastinating or avoiding or just outright trying to get away from. And as my dear, dear partner has said many times, Maria Popova, she said, you don't find the time to do the things you want to do. You make the time. And so ultimately, if watching an entire series of Game of Thrones is more important than doing that sketching, you will watch the Game of Thrones. If sketching is more important, you'll either sketch while you're watching Game of Thrones or you'll sketch it when you turn off Game of Thrones. Number 8, I think that confidence is overrated. One of the things that people often say, especially again my students say, that they'll do something when they feel confident enough, when they feel secure enough, when they feel talented enough, when they feel pretty enough. And I think that what we're actually saying is that when I feel good about myself, I'll try to do it. And I read a couple of years ago an incredible article about Barbra Streisand. And I guess this is a moment where I should ask, does everybody know who Barbra Streisand is? Because I know, I sometimes say this and people are like, who's Barbra Streisand? And I'm like, oh my God, I'm so old. In any case, there was an article in the New Yorker about Barbra Streisand and her incredible longevity, her career that spans now 50-something years. And they were talking to her manager about her longevity, and they asked, what is it about her? Is her acting, her singing, her drive, her ambition, her upbringing? What is her secret? And he said it's actually none of those things. It's not her acting or her directing or her singing or her being able to do all these different things all at the same time. He said that her great, great talent, her greatest talent, was her ability to do all of those things while suffering from debilitating stage fright. And I thought, my God, she wanted to do these things so badly that she had to do them anyway, even if she didn't have the confidence to do them. I recently interviewed Dani Shapiro, a writer, and I interviewed her on Design Matters, and she said that she felt that courage, that confidence was not the important ingredient to succeeding. It's actually courage. That most people don't really like overly confident people. They're kind of annoying, they're arrogant, and we kind of just don't feel really good about ourselves when we're around them, so we don't want to be around them. What's really more important than confidence is courage. The idea that even if you aren't feeling good about yourself, even if you do have debilitating stage fright, you're actually going to do it anyway, because your life depends on it. You have no other choice. Number 9, be aware of who you're doing things for. I've gotten to a point in my life where I feel like most of what I do tends to be as a reaction to obligations. Somebody really wants me to do it, and I'm afraid of letting them down. Somebody wants me to do something, and I'm afraid of hurting their feelings. And I think that it's really important that we're aware of who we do things for and understand that you can't make everyone happy no matter how hard you try or how badly you want to. The very same art that some people love and admire, whether it be Jackson Pollock or whether it be Salvador Dali, people will like it or may not like it. Art, design, life is a tremendously subjective experience. We can't even agree on what a good meal is on Yelp. And yet we want to make everybody happy doing this thing that we think can have universal appeal. I came across this wonderful quote that I thought really said it better than anything I could say. It's by Dita Von Teese, the American burlesque dancer. She said, "You could be the ripest, juiciest peach in the world, and there's still going to be someone who hates peaches." How good is that? And then lastly, learn and build from your failures and rejections, but it's only a failure if you accept defeat. I think Einstein was the one that said, if you keep doing the same things over and over and expect different results, that's the definition of insanity. And I fundamentally disagree with that. Okay, I'm saying it. I disagree with Einstein. I think that doing things over and over again and expecting different results is the definition of hope. And as long as we have hope that something can happen, and as long as we believe in ourselves and keep trying to make something happen, then something amazing is likely to happen. So there are my top 10 things I wish I knew when I gave my first Creative Mornings talk. I hope that this has been fun to hear, listen to. Thank you very much.